Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first NAFTA-focused webinar in partnership with the American Chamber of Commerce in Canada. My name is Jens Michael Schaal, and I'm a VP of Global Expansion with Invest Ottawa, which is the City of Ottawa's lead economic development agency for knowledge-based industries. Until last August, I was based at Canada's Consulate General in New York City, and as the Ontario government representative there, I worked closely with companies on both sides of the borders, and I could witness firsthand the efforts our federal government colleagues undertook and was putting into the successful conclusion of the NAFTA successor. The Canada-US relationship is unique, and of course it's well known that Canada is the United States' largest goods export market. Ontario alone is the #1 customer for 19 US states. I believe that the CUSMA or USMCA, depending on which side of the border you sit, will ensure that trade between Canada and the US and Mexico will remain strong and mostly hassle-free. I hope this webinar and also the webinar that we host next week will help answer many of the questions you may have. I want to, of course, thank the panelists for taking time to join us today and share their expertise. I know, it's a very busy time, especially with the impacts of COVID-19, so I really greatly appreciate you joining us today. Finally, our team at Invest Ottawa stand ready to help in any way we can. I would encourage you to reach out to either myself or a member of my team. If you have any questions about the Ottawa market or curious about the service that Invest Ottawa offers to support companies of all sizes. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Rick. Rick, take it away.
Hey, well, good afternoon. Thank you, Jens. My name's Rick Tatchuk, and I'm the chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in Canada. We're also known as the AmCham. And on behalf of AmCham Canada, I'd like to thank Jens, you and your tremendous staff, and Trevor Kerr in particular on the staff for their exceptional work putting this event together today. I'd like to also acknowledge and thank our speakers, Dan Ujczo from Dickinson, Wright, down in Ohio. We have Marlene Floyd of Microsoft, Elise Maheu of 3M, and Brenda Champagne of Ross Video here in Ottawa. You know, navigating the new NAFTA or USMCA CUSMA is vitally important to just about any company that does business across the border. So it's been almost 3 years now that we've been working towards an agreement. And in just 3 short weeks, we're going to see final implementation. So we're at a very kind of interesting turning point in terms of the US-Canada relationship and the implementation of this new agreement. The goal of our conversation today is really to give you the most up-to-date information on, as possible on the USMCA implementation. And I'd encourage you to take this opportunity to send some questions into our panelists, to Dan Ujczo. We've got some tremendously knowledgeable people here, so I'd encourage you to take advantage of their availability. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us. So with that, Dan, if I could pass things down to Columbus, please take it away, sir.
Great. Thanks, Rick, and good afternoon, everybody. And it's wonderful to be here in this capacity. We're proud members of AmCham, our law firm, Dickinson, Wright, and just building off of Jens' comments, we probably will be using the term CUSMA and USMCA interchangeably because our firm does, just like was said earlier, we straddle both sides of the Canada-US border. Our firm is headquartered in Detroit, dating back to the 1870s, with 20-some offices located throughout the United States. Our offices in Canada, Ontario in particular, date back almost to Confederation. So we are one of the truly kind of Canada-US, North American law firms, and we'll use those terms interchangeably. But a credit to AmCham and Invest Ottawa, because as Rick mentioned, we're coming up about 2 weeks, and this was scheduled many moons ago. But as some of you likely saw last night, one of the almost final pieces, the uniform regulations that the 3 countries have come together, kind of the handbook to how to use USMCA, came out very late in the day yesterday. So you're getting this in real time today. And then building off of Rick's comments just a moment ago, I think for most of us, anything before March seems like an eternity ago. But during USMCA, it seems like we've been doing this forever and a day. And Ottawa and AmCham have played important roles in that you may go back to the fall of 2017. It was the third negotiating round of USMCA held in Ottawa. Our speakers were with us. We held a reception for the negotiators in that round at the Westin Hotel in beautiful Ottawa. And what I can tell you is there was not a drop of good Canadian rye, Jack Daniels, or tequila left on the shelf, not only because people were enjoying the camaraderie, but also because that was the round that it became very clear that do no harm, make small changes was not going to work. That the U.S. was very serious about renovating North America. And from that moment forward, the negotiations changed. And for the last, as Rick said, almost 2.5 years since that time, we've been working on this. The negotiators work furiously, the business community, and many others. And so here we are with 2 weeks to go in terms of getting ready for this. July 1 is the enforced date. We have 3 amazing speakers today to really walk us through what to do in the next 2 weeks and afterwards. And the method to our madness today is we're just going to take a few minutes, starting with Marlene and then Elise and then Brenda. They're going to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what they're doing, and then we're going to have 3 15-minute roundtable discussions. The first one we'll look at how do you get ready for USMCA? If I'm a company, what do I need to be doing? Secondly, what are some of those issues that we don't read a lot about in the media? What are some of the really good news stories in USMCA? Because there are many, many positives that can benefit your business operations. And then lastly, what are opportunities for companies in Canada, in Ottawa in particular and beyond, to take advantage of not only USMCA, but Canada's trade cloud, its innovation economy, immigration, et cetera, for those of you that are looking to candidly invest in Ottawa or have already invested in Ottawa. We're going to take questions at the end. We've allotted a session there. So as Rick mentioned, you can see at the bottom of your tool a chat function for Q&A. You can submit questions there. If you got a question right now, submit it. Or as you're hearing things, only the panelists will see it. So there's no such thing as a bad question here, but we are using that feature to bunch those questions together. If a number of people have the same question, we'll kind of knock out several small animals with one hard object. So with that being said, if you do want to change the view, you can. I think we're all getting accustomed to products like Zoom, as well as other great products like Microsoft Teams, mindful of who our speakers are today. But if you do need to change the view, gallery view is up in the right-hand corner so you can see all of the speakers and not just the one that's speaking in my big head in your image right now. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to each of our speakers, starting with Marlene, to just quickly introduce themselves and some introductory comments.
Hi, well, thanks so much, Dan. Thanks for having me today. Thanks to Invest Ottawa and AmCham. Marlene Floyd, I'm the National Director of Corporate Affairs for Microsoft, based in Ottawa, now based in the lovely suburb of Elmer in Gatineau, Quebec. So I apologize in advance if any small children come banging through the doors, but that's also the new reality of work from home. So like every company that has an American or U.S. Operations, you know, we're looking at July 1st. It's fast approaching. As we concurrently have been working on our COVID response, I think it's become very clear that supply chains around the world are impacted by global events like this, and it's also stressing the importance of just the U.S.-Canada relationship. You know, a few months ago, USMCA and the fact that it's coming into play 2 weeks ago would have been front page news, but now we're talking about supply chains and interconnectivity that's taking center stage. So it's all part and parcel. From a Microsoft perspective, as a fully digital company, the benefit to USMCA are really in the modernized digital trade and intellectual property rules that have been placed in it. And so we'll be talking about that a little later and looking forward to the conversation today.
Great, thanks, Marlene. Over to you, Elise. We still got you. There you go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So good afternoon. So Elise Maheu, I'm responsible for government affairs for 3M Canada and also for manufacturing for 3M in the US. So 3M has been in Canada since 1951. So why is USMCA so important? So the first statement we always say at 3M is that 3M advocates for free and fair trade, which is, you know, under the time of COVID-19, it's a very important timing to say that 3M has been very vocal in the last months to advocate for the freedom of movement of goods. And USMCA is a very important tool to do that. It's probably not the only tool that we're seeing right now. We're a net exporter out of the US. We're also a net exporter actually out of Canada. And more than 1,000 jobs in Canada depend actually on our ability to sell globally. And most of our exports actually are going to the US. So when adopted 25 years ago, NAFTA was unprecedented and a really important tool. And what is important about USMCA for us, I think the same as Marlene was saying, is probably the strengthening of rules of origin and the IP, intellectual property in an innovative company is very important. And I will also come back to that. So I think it's USMCA is a foundation for all three countries, and it's worth preserving and definitely building on moving forward.
Great, thanks Elise. And then over to you, Brenda.
Hello, I'm Brenda Champagne, and my job at Ross Video is International Logistics Specialist. So I am basically in the front line creating any of our certificates of origin. Ross has a large holding in the US. We make major exports. Our manufacturing is done in a border town, so we're doing daily consolidated shipments into the US. So having that relationship with our US customs facilities, with our brokers is essential to our business. We have been a NAFTA company for years. I still have a hard time pronouncing these new acronyms and keep going to new NAFTA, but there is plenty of opportunity for various companies within Canada and the US to bust through the market with the new trade agreement that is finally catching up with current technology. Thank you.
Oh, and that's a perfect segue, Brenda, and I'm going to come right back to you as we launch the first roundtable. You know, real big picture, if this is your first day ever hearing about CUSMA, CUSMA, depending on where you're from, I'm guessing. But, you know, we've looked at it and explaining this over the past several years is that, you know, President Trump came to places like Ohio, where I am, or Michigan, or places like that, and said he was going to rip up NAFTA. Well, we know that's not true because about 60%, actually it's 57%, of the agreement is pretty much the same as the original NAFTA or has been upgraded with provisions in trade agreements that we've seen since that time, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, on the other hand, some of the commentary is, well, then it's just a rebrand. This is the president, you know, buying a hotel and just putting his name on it. And we know it's not a rebrand because 40% of a $1 trillion economy in North America is still a heck, I'm a lawyer, not a math guy, but that's still a lot. Particularly when you consider that we're completely redoing ways that the auto industry, one of those foundational elements of North America. So if it's not a rip-up, it's not a rebrand, it's a renovation. And like any renovation, we have a fresh coat of paint on that 57%. And Brenda, to your comment, it's bringing it into the 21st century. And I think as we've worked with companies over the last year or so, looking at this agreement and the text, there's a lot of good news buried in there. Secondly, there's upgrades to the fixtures and appliances. We have a digital chapter. There's new worlds in customs, energy chapters, labor provisions. So those are, we have a smart house now, if you kind of think about of what we're doing, and we'll hear more about that from Marlene and Elise in just a moment. Lastly, then we're knocking down some walls and putting up some new fixtures. And anybody that's done a renovation knows that when you knock down walls, it usually takes longer, costs more, and is more disruptive than you can ever possibly plan for, and that's what we're dealing with in autos and certain other sectors. But turning it back to you, for companies that are preparing right now, you mentioned that you're on the front lines, like myself and others, when it comes to customs. How did you begin to prepare? Because the most common thing, every webinar we've done, every conversation with every client we've had is, oh my God, we're getting rid of NAFTA certificates of origin. This piece of paper that said, I'm good, I've been using this for 20 years, 20 odd years, my little security blanket NAFTA certificate of origin that says this good is perfect, and now we're getting rid of those. And I can tell you I'm on every call with U.S. Customs, and even some of the most technologically proficient people, customs brokers for 30 years, are saying, what are we doing without it? So how did you guys begin the compliance process in terms of your company at Ross Video and getting ready for USMCA?
Well, first of all, we had a long background with NAFTA. So we're using NAFTA as our backdrop, even though things have changed. Ross is very proficient in its product knowledge. We have gone to the government to get rulings on many of its products just because we are technology, it's changing, and if your product is not listed in the tariff, you're using interpretive rules. And your interpretive rules may not match what US or Canada Customs imagine your good as. So if your tariff is incorrect, your whole analysis is incorrect. So what we have done is take a look at our big runners, our high value products based on commodity, and taken a look at the new rules, specific rules of origin, to see if there's any changes. So then if there's not, we can just wipe those items off the to-do list and reissue under clear conscience. But it's the new products and any of the products that regional value content may have not been appropriate, but now with the new changes with the de minimis rule from 7 to 10% and other new promises, we could work on maybe adding to our our portal. So those are the things we're working on. We're also daily in contact with our customs broker. They are, I said I was the lead person. They are the ones that are dealing with the customs issues. So you need to have a very progressive partnership with your customs broker. They can advise you. The new regulations do not provide a cover letter or for your certificate. They just provided a list of mandatory criteria that you have to cover off. Our customs broker has developed that document and is applying it to its customers. So that really helps us to be able to be progressive and at the front end when we are about to reintroduce.
That's interesting, and it's amazing how you said that, because that's the exact advice that how we've been working through this process is if you're a company trying to get ready, it's look at how you're using NAFTA right now, if you are, and that starts with I love your phrase big runners, because that's what we say. Get a list from your customs brokers of what you're doing, look at the HS codes, and then take a look at the USMCA and say, have the rules changed? And in many areas, they have changed for the better. Chemicals, polymers, certain areas of catching up to speed, electronics as well. These are areas that actually the rules have become more simplified. So, you know, I had a company recently that was not willing to go through this process. They were fighting tooth and nail, and called back after we did a couple hours with them and said, man, that one little change of a code is going to save us $17 million a year. And that's just the paperwork issue. I mean, that's $17 million at a time we're all looking underneath the seat cushions right now. Now, Brenda, you mentioned just very quickly the certificate of origin, and I want to then turn it over to Marlene and Elise if you have any comments in this first tranche of issues in terms of preparations. But on the certificate of origin, right now, the idea was we wanted to give more companies flexibility, that they wouldn't have one form that they've had to use. And as you said, there's now 9 data elements, which are basically the things that were in the NAFTA certificate, but you can put them on your purchase orders. You can put it somewhere on shipping documents. But the key is to actually do the NAFTA verification, right? The idea was in the old days, what would happen is people say, I need a NAFTA certificate of origin, and somebody would just send them one. But nobody would do the denying analysis. So are you going back and looking at your suppliers? How far back are you going in the chain as you're looking to verify?
Well, Ross has developed a program within its MRP. It's a costed indented bill of material. So, and I've also developed a data repository of our harmonized codes, country of origin at the component level. So we do a run of our bill of materials against the NAFTA rule. And if we transform, we hit the mark. So we're bringing in electronics, capacitors, integrated circuits, connectors. We're building the boards. We're selling the marketing part at a totally different tariff. So regardless of the origin of your components, you've transformed them into a totally different item. So you really do have to have a strong infrastructure in order to support your analysis. So last year we were audited for NAFTA, and we had a very, very positive response. So within these audits, and you need to be prepared for an audit, you need to have your documentation in order. You need to be able to back up the document that you have presented. I've seen documents over the years where it's very difficult or very easy to know that the issuer was not very savvy in NAFTA. So even when you receive a NAFTA certificate, you need to vet that certificate. You just can't use it at face value. You need to have some expertise in-house or available to you to take a look at those different elements on the certificate.
Now that's a great point. I mean, you mentioned as well, now is the time, if you're a company, to take a look at, okay, here's a product we have. Is it classified correctly for tariff purposes? And we've been getting these certificates over the years from our suppliers from Mexico or the US. Do we really know what's in there? Do we trust those folks that this information is still accurate? Now's the time to do that. Now, just as a comforting point is that US Customs, I think, and Canada Border Services Agency as well, are kind of sick of questions about the certificates of origin. So they're going to put a template online pretty soon. But what we want to caution all of you in talking with our speakers before is just because there's a form, that shouldn't make you comfortable. You still have to do the underlying analysis, which is, does my product still qualify for USMCA? In most instances, it will. In fact, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. But you have to go back and do that analysis, because if Customs comes knocking on the door, they're going to want to see that analysis and where you're storing that. So shifting it over to you, Marlene, are there areas they have? Microsoft obviously is huge in-house compliance teams, et cetera, but what are the steps that you all are taking in getting ready for USMCA as you're moving product from all over the world into North America?
Yeah, and thanks for that, Dan. And I think differing from Ross' video, you know, I think the benefits that we've seen out of USMCA really come with the digital trade chapter that was created. When NAFTA was created 25 years ago, it was just shortly after the development of the World Wide Web. So it wasn't crafted with today's digital economy in mind, and what a huge piece of the economy that now is. And unlike you know, industries such as auto, which massive manufacturing operations in both US and Canada, we don't face those same challenges in advance of July 1st just because of the scope and the amount of manufacturing that we do here. We don't package up product anymore either, right? It's all cloud-based. Microsoft is a cloud company. Our product is data. Our product is technology that's provided. So where we're starting to put our focus in advance of July 1 is really educating our workforce and our sales teams and our leadership teams across the 3 markets in the US, Mexico, and Canada, so they understand the new rules, but also sensitizing them to opportunities that USMCA might provide. But like all companies, we're reviewing how to balance reliability and efficiency in our supply chain in order to ensure predictability. And I think COVID has really shown us that predictability is needed. And, you know, because of the unexpected strain that it's placed on the North American integration system, you know, and so we're watching for things. So we're educating our workforce, but we're also looking to see challenges that might arise in the horizon regarding policy setting, for example, where one country may set a different policy in response to COVID, which in turn impacts the supply chain in another country. And so we've seen examples of that already with the initial wave of COVID. And so those are some of the things that we're starting to look at of how can we ensure that predictability, especially in the age of COVID, because that's something we all have to start thinking about.
That's a great point. And Elise, over to you. Just as we round out this first tranche of topics, are there, obviously 3M's been busy on some other issues in the last several months, as always, but what have USMCA preparations look like? Are there issues that you're seeing, some best practices, challenges, et cetera? And then we'll kind of transition into the second area that we'll talk about today.
So we're in the business of making things and shipping things, so mainly across the Canada-US border and also US-Mexico border. So we've been working mainly for the past 6 months to get ready for USMCA. So about 75% of our products, so I mean, just to remind people, we sell about 55,000 products in 3M. So 75% of our products would have kept the same rule of origin as in NAFTA, but 25% would be different under USMCA. So as you said earlier, then some of that created some great opportunities, actually. And others have created some more restrictive rules, such as under auto. And we've also worked with our suppliers and our customers for new certificates. And it has required us to mobilize a lot of people in our trade compliance department. And I want to add that, you know, we had to go through this process at the same time that because of the export restrictions that was put out of the US on a lot of the protective equipment coming out of the US, required, although Canada was and Mexico were put on some of the exemption of those restrictions, a lot of the procedures that we had to go through from a customs perspective are still today very manual and require a lot of labor to export every single shipment of protective equipment. So we had to go through that in addition to be ready for USMCA. So this has been a quite admin intensive for our trade compliance people to get ready for USMCA.
Glad to hear we're not alone out there with some of the craziness of the past few months. It's been an interesting time in global trade, to say the least, on top of an extraordinary several years. So I just want to make sure I heard, you can nod instead of going off. You said 25% was impacted one way or the other by USMCA?
Yes.
Yep.
So mainly auto, chemicals, and textile. So these were the ones actually that we had to review.
Yeah, and I would say in summary, our experience is around the same with obviously it depends on sectors, but auto and textiles isn't just the clothes we wear, it's fibers, wire harnesses, things like that, braided pieces of wiring and things of that nature. But just as we wrap up this first bucket, What I would say to folks is if you are importing goods from a non-NAFTA country, and let's just pick a random one, China, and bringing that into Mexico and the United States and then going into Canada, or certainly bringing it into Canada and then going into the United States, that those are areas that you really want to drill down on. And making sure that those products, just getting back to Brenda's point earlier, that you know what those codes are, that there's actually, that you're complying with the new rules under USMCA. And then, you know, once you're done with USMCA, making sure are there potentially other tariffs in play if you're importing into the US. So if you're right now wondering where to start, those are the products I would look at, are things of that nature, because that was a target in USMCA, was to close that back door, alleged, to North America for China and other third countries through Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So that's just a free tip there in terms of getting started. Now, turning it over to, we're hearing a lot about the positive sense, and we don't really see a lot of that in media coverage, and it's always Trump versus Trudeau, or what T-shirt is Minister Freeland wearing, or Deputy Prime Minister Freeland. We didn't hear a lot about these really positive changes. One of those, Marlene and Elise, you've mentioned it multiple times now, is the digital chapter and IP changes. Can you talk a little bit about what that means on the ground, to how that is going to be transformative for the North American economy?
Sure. Maybe I'll go first, and then Elise, I'll gladly pass over to you. So as I've referenced several times, you know, the USMCA boasts the most advanced digital trade and IP provisions of any trade agreement. And this will really help drive innovation and growth. As I mentioned, NAFTA, this was before the dawn of the World Wide Web and the digital economy as we now know it. And some of the provisions in the digital trade chapter that I think are really important are, one is the cross-border data transfers that are very core to the digital economy. These are important to the development of AI, industrial IoT, and cybersecurity solutions. They maintain free international data transfers is important because we're increasingly relying on that data to efficiently produce and supply products and services. And so USMCA will allow to ensure that data can be transferred freely for business purposes across North America, while prohibiting any unnecessary restrictions or disguised barriers to trade. Second, the USMCA also prohibits data localization mandates, allowing companies to compete abroad, which I think is important. We also, it extends beyond data transfers to protections of source code, algorithms, promoting open government data, and calling for risk-based approaches to cybersecurity. And then finally, and is a 21st century IP chapter. And this one is really important because it, for a company like ours, includes copyright framework geared to the digital economy with safe harbors for legitimate enterprises that aren't directly benefiting from online infringement. So those are kind of the buckets that really, those weren't even considered in the previous NAFTA agenda or the previous NAFTA agreement. And they are really based on this new economy, which has emerged in the last 25 years and didn't have the protections or weren't really considered within the NAFTA agreement. So those are some of the positives. Maybe I'll turn it over to Elise if she has anything else to add.
No, I agree. I think, so not wanting to repeat, I think for us, the IP aspect is really important because like 3M really relies on intellectual property and patents and trademarks. So that is probably one of the most important aspects for us. So, and looking at maybe other digital aspects of the USMCA is probably actually things like the way that, you know, the agreement allows us actually to deal with cross-border issues like single window systems and how to deal with the paperwork that used to have to be done actually in paper that now actually can be done electronically. That seemed to be kind of straightforward, but but it's really important when you're exporting and importing a lot of products. Also, looking at, you know, formatting and the way that that we're looking at the digital documents and information technology moving forward.
And Elise, while I got you, there's a, you know, you and I over the past decade or so have sat through more Canada-U.S. regulatory cooperation stakeholder meetings than probably any human being should. Just the sound of it, regulatory cooperation, I know it gets people like us excited, but a lot of that homework that President Obama and the Prime Minister did, Prime Minister Harper launched Beyond the Border was one, and you touched on that just a moment ago. I mean, one of the interesting pieces right now is I'm very confident that the Canada-U.S. border would not be working as efficiently as it is during COVID were it not for, you know, about 15 or more years of homework that were done in the wake of 9/11. And that border work has found its way into USMCA. And you mentioned single window, and there's a customs and trade facilitation chapter, chapter 7 of CUSMA, that really deals with having a technological border. It wasn't that long ago where trucks could pull up and still, and Brenda, as you know, still hand clipboards of truck manifests, handwritten manifests. And a lot of this is going to take care of issues we have at the U.S.-Mexico border on the commercial side, only being able to use certain customs brokers at certain times and kind of Mexico auditing companies without any rhyme or reason for it. So I think that's going to change some things. But on the regulatory side, do you see USMCA being a framework for taking some of that work that's been done, where we could get to the point where the U.S. and Canada and Mexico start looking at, hey, we may regulate something like PPE or medical devices or other healthcare products in a unified way moving forward? Is that an opportunity in more the mid to long range on the regulatory co-op side? Is that something you guys are excited about, or is it kind of we'll see how it goes type of thing?
So PPE actually regulations are already aligned. So it's so the issue with PPE is more on the export restriction than on the regulatory side. So I think that if you take PPE, they are regulated under NIOSH, and all three countries do recognize NIOSH regulations. So I think that unfortunately, you know, like if you look at what happened under COVID, there's more than 54 countries in the world that have actually issued or voted, you know, export controls, you know, under COVID for PPEs. And so, and unfortunately, there's no trade agreements that have actually protected any country from export restrictions. So maybe the question is, you know, is there maybe a provision in a future trade agreement or something that could be included that would actually protect, you know, countries from export restrictions in the future for critical supplies? But that's a big question.
Oh, great. And maybe Brenda, turning it over to you. And by the way, those of you that see the lights going off here, it's because we're just in reopen mode in Ohio, and none of us know how the lights work without our administrative team here. So they just kind of turn off at random times. So it's part of business resumption you didn't expect, along with protests outside. But against that backdrop, Brenda, are there things in CUSMA that you all have found are opportunities in the future that, hey, we didn't know this was going to be in there, or hey, as we looked at this some more, that there's something here that's actually going to save us some money or do help our operations and be, you know, assist as a very innovative company as you are? Are there things there that just were, wow, this is going to be really good for us? Well,
basically, it's been more of a technology enhancement rather than product specific. So by having, we've just developed a new process where we are data downloading between our service providers, and the information flows more freely. It's available to customs prior to the shipment and well in advancement. We rarely ever have an audit at the border. The customs is used to our products. We're doing daily consolidations. Where we find the difference is the US has opened up the CEE facilities, which are the centers of excellence and expertise. That's where your audit point will be. Each Ross's center is in California. It is manned with individuals that are experts in our product line. So the information gathers at that point, and then the audits are triggered at that area. It used to be at the border points. They've changed the caliber, and now the experts are doing all of the advanced warnings. So basically, our data exchange with the consistency and data quality has really assisted Ross with its imports into the US, and vice versa, because we do have consolidations. We have a big holding of suppliers and distributors in the US. So we're using that port of Ogdensburg, since we are a border town, on a daily basis. So it's been very beneficial.
That's an interesting point on the centers of excellence. And just as we transition into the third topic area, which is more of kind of along the lines of what you just said, Brenda, which is what's happening ahead, or where are there opportunities for Canadian companies, not just with USMCA, but the broader trade platform as well. But I did just want to remind folks, we are getting a lot of questions, but if you have questions, go ahead, and we're going to start taking those in just a few minutes in the Q&A chat. So you just type your question in the thing, and again, nobody can see it. So I know we all get a little bashful about that, but just feel free to put your question in there about any related issues. We'll use that term in the broadest sense. But also, just as a wrap up for companies, again, so July 1st is the enforce date. I will mention that on a U.S. Customs call with U.S. Customs, they did indicate that they will have what's called informed compliance, which is basically between July 1st and January 1st. They amplified that term in another call, called it maximum flexibility for companies. That phrase was used multiple times. So the idea is, we know we're doing this at the last minute. And then that's kind of been the story of CUSMA. Actually, we've done everything at the last minute. But there will be a period to get in there. But I really caution companies that to do the preparations now, because informed compliance doesn't mean get out of jail free. That you're going to have to demonstrate to customs, and that's true with CBSA and SAA in Mexico, that you're moving in the right direction, that you're trying to comply, just we didn't get it maybe quite right here. Additionally, I mentioned yesterday the uniform regulations came out last night. Those are the technical issues. We also expect to see on June 15th from U.S. Customs and Border Protection interim instructions on customs issues become final, and there will be changes between the interim that were released in April and final. And CBSA also issued interim instructions in April that likely will be tweaked a bit to adjust to some of the changes on the U.S. side. And we're still waiting for some things from the U.S. Department of Labor. So there's going to be a lot of information over the next 2 weeks. And for those of you that maybe saw the uniform regulations last night, there's a lot to digest. There are some pretty significant changes in there, not just for autos, but across the board. So I would just stay plugged in, but waiting is not an option. This is very real at this point. But that should not just be the stick of compliance, but the carrot is, as we've mentioned now multiple times, that there's real opportunities. So, and I think that's particularly true for companies in Canada. And Elise, if I can turn it over to you, and then Marlene and Brenda, to perhaps use this opportunity to champion what are those opportunities, not just with USMCA, but maybe what I've called Canada's trade cloud, other agreements, talent, technology, all of those things. Let's put it, I'll just be very blunt. Why is Canada the great place to do business right now in the wake of what is a global storm happening? What are those opportunities that you see from your vantage point, Elise?
For doing business in Canada? No, yeah. I think, and I'm sorry if I'm going back to that, but you know, talking about, you know, the export, you know, the free trade. I think that if we're looking around the world, and this COVID-19 era, Canada is one of the few countries actually that has signed in, actually has being against export restrictions and being really supportive of free trade. And I think that makes Canada a very interesting place to invest for companies. As I said earlier, I mean, for PPE and medical supplies and for goods that are critical for COVID-19, we've seen 54 countries around the world that have imposed export controls and export restrictions. And Canada is not one of those. So I think it shows that Canada is definitely a supporter of free trade and an important partner. And I think that Canada has been demonstrating through USMCA of CUSMA and also through the whole period that it is open to keeping trade open with all the key partners that it's dealing with, and including the more difficult one, actually including China, I would say. So I think it's an important thing to mention, and why I think that many companies are going to look at Canada a little differently, I think, moving forward than maybe they did until a couple of years ago.
That's interesting. And from your vantage point, Marlene, from Microsoft's perspective, I know talent is a big feature in workforce and the ability to recruit great talent. Can you talk a bit about that? Not just the digital platform, but it's people doing digital, right? So in terms of a talented workforce. So what are those opportunities that you see in Canada?
Well, obviously Microsoft has a pretty significant footprint here in Canada because of the things you just mentioned: an educated and skilled workforce. It's innovative. It is connected to the U.S. and so we've made massive investments in Vancouver and Montreal with research and development, and because there are smart people here, but we want to do business in Canada. It's good business for us to be in Canada. You know, I think as we move into the COVID response as well, and the economic response as we all start to open up our respective markets, I think that the reality and what we've seen coming out of COVID is just that we need to have a North American type approach to things as well. And I think that we can't underestimate the strength that we have working together. And so working together in order to strengthen those supply chains and to make sure that our recovery, it will be connected. The US and Canada and Mexico are interconnected. We're our biggest trading partners. And so anything that we do in the age of COVID, in the response, will have to be intertwined. So yeah, the Canadian marketplace we've been doing business here for almost 40 years, as long as Microsoft has been in business. And so it's a key partner for us, but the educated workforce, like it's extraordinary. And instead of bringing them to the US, it's also about bringing our people up here so that they can learn and appreciate and to learn from the Canadians and what we're doing in this country.
Well, can I just build on that last point that you made in terms of, do you find the differences in the immigration systems between Canada and the United States as an advantage for, obviously, it's so much of our debate on this side of the border, I wear both hats. So on the U.S. side of the border is about undocumented migration, AKA illegal immigration, a politically incorrect term, mindful of that. But there's so many opportunities on the business immigration side. In Canada's system, so many of our clients benefit from Canada's system. Is that what you're seeing as well from Microsoft? Is that driving your investment decisions as well?
It's one of the decisions, but it's not the only decision by any means, Dan. I think that the immigration system in Canada, especially with visas and those pieces in particular, are immensely helpful in order to bring skilled talent into Canada as well. We're seeing the added benefit of bringing people because of the clusters. Like we have, for example, significant AI clusters that are forming both here in Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, and out west. And just the fact that they're there is attracting talent to Canada as well, because they want to work with those individuals. So it's those types of things is where Canada is really making a name for itself in that aspect. Plus, you couple that with that extreme knowledge and the desire to work with these smart people in these smart places, with a immigration system that allows us to bring in people, you know, on a 2-week visa, for example, or 2-week lead time for a visa. Those are really, they're big factors.
That's interesting. And over to you, Brenda. You know, you've mentioned a few great advantages of being in Canada. One being, you're right on the border there in some cases, but you're also in Ottawa. The company has strong roots there. What are you seeing as is that capability to arbitrage the two economies and those types of issues? Well, let me put it this way: when you're out pitching customers, what advantages do you have by being that truly cross-border company?
Our availability, to deliver. We work in the broadcast area. We have a customer go down. They need a replacement part. They need it the next morning. Because of our close ties and the logistics infrastructure, we're able to do that. We're able to supply that. We've also set up flash facilities within the US to make domestic shipments to our customers to support their warranty needs. So we're able to actively provide support to our customers. There's not a delay. You're not dealing with China. You're not dealing with another country where it's very difficult to do any kind of expediting. If not, at times, I've been dealing with China, the airports are closed, or the airlines at this time, they're canceling flights, they're rescheduling, so there's lots of delays. Between Canada and the US, even though we're going through this terrible situation with COVID, our borders are strong. We're still moving freight daily and being able to support that niche. So it's very vital for us to keep that, that port open.
Well, in that vein too, Brenda, I want to turn it over to the questions here and just remind folks, kind of a last call for questions if you can, because we got a pretty full deck, but please send them in through the Q&A or chat feature. But Brenda, you and I were talking before the call. Ross did some interesting things during COVID. Do you just want to talk about that as well? Some of the programs that you guys launched.
Because of our requirement for on-site, hands-on communication with our customers to set up commissioning of products or whatever, because we're a broadcast facility, we're able to develop videos and how-to programs in order to do the same type of support without having to have an employee on site, which has been very beneficial. Our customers are still getting the service, but without any of the hazards of travel. So Ross has been very open to different aspects and different ways of promoting that type of service. And I think it's going to be an ongoing thing, even after COVID, because it really showed that we're able to showcase our products without actually sending individuals. So it's been very spectacular. I saw a couple of the videos, they're very well done, and even I could understand parts of it.
Well, turning now to, that's great. Turning now to the questions. We have a nice bucket here. I'm going to merge a few of them together because I think they're maybe leading to the same places, but I'll just throw a kind of a mix of a few out there. So if you're a technology company in Canada, an SME on the tech side, digital side, but providing services in the United States, what are some of the issues that may pop up for those companies? You know, we've talked a lot about digital. Are there things that are going to help those folks? One that immediately pops to mind is moving people across the border, and I'm happy to address that as well with others. But maybe, Marlene, I see you shaking your head, so I'm going to play my old law professor routine. Oops, that's a student that wants to say something. So maybe turning it over to you. That's exactly. Okay. But go if you have any comments there, and invite Elise or Brenda as well for if you're a tech company, what are some of the things you should be looking at?
But I think it just opens up a whole world of opportunity for you, right? So these type of pieces, and now that we have digital provisions that protect, you know, so that you ensure that any transfer of data, if there's localization requirements, those are things that are really going to help with your business processes. I'm going to have to throw it over to Dan to see if there's any specific requirements that would have to be done for a SaaS group that that is something that they're trying to sell in the U.S. My understanding would be no, but.
Yeah, does anybody else want to comment on the question at all, or you know, the one thing that I think it's touched on in a few companies or a few questions, excuse me, is one area, and we were pretty aggressive, as was AmCham, in the early days of these negotiations to try to get the labor mobility, the temporary entry, so business immigration, dealt with in NAFTA. Largely NAFTA, as many of you know, has a list of professions that frankly hasn't been updated for the 21st century economy. And some of you have NAFTA visas, TN visas. We were told in so many words that nothing's going to change. In fact, there was a strong movement to get rid of the NAFTA visa as part of U.S. immigration changes. So I think in some ways we consider it a miss that we were not able to upgrade that in USMCA. At the same time, it's a win because it could have been gone, frankly, given some of the tone and tenor. So I do think that we work very closely. We have an immigration team, as I know both all the companies here have to deal with these issues. But I do think that is the one issue where tech companies or those SaaS companies providing services into the U.S. run into the most, is where is the line drawn? Because very few people just sell a product anymore into the United States or a service. You have to move the bodies to train and sell and do all of those things. And there are a number of ways, and I would really commend Canada's Border Services Agency, the Citizenship and Immigration Canada have done a great job inbound into Canada. And candidly, US CBP has done a great job too. But you have to know before you go on immigration issues. Don't ever send a body or a good to the border without a lot of paperwork being involved. So that would be my initial response to that question is it's going to be understanding what the people issues are around that immigration. But also one thing we talked a lot about with Brenda was making sure you're reclassifying your goods and knowing that that's for us customs and trade nerds. But there are some really positive changes, as have been said, on intellectual property but every company should be taking a look at their intellectual property portfolio for what you have patented and trademarked, because some of the timelines have changed. There's going to be changes in both Canada and Mexico's domestic law. Some of those are already in play. So you're going to want to take a look at your IP portfolio too. We have a huge IP team, and I can tell you they all have calendar reminders that tell them when to talk to which clients about your patents up or your trademarks up, or but if those timelines have changed, it's a time to address the calendar alert too. So it's very important for companies to look at their IP portfolios, the valuations there. Brenda, this question looks maybe right up your alley, and invite Elise and Marlene to jump in too. And it gets to what you were talking about at the outset, is it's very time consuming for a company to go back and look at all of its suppliers and say, I need you to verify your origin, certificates of origin. Do you have any tricks of the trade? I mean, you talked a little bit about it, Brenda, but is it one of those things that has to be done, so do it, or where do you kind of fall on that process? Because it is challenging, no question about it.
So you're talking about in receipt of a certificate?
Yeah, it looks like the question's really saying, look, hey, it's time consuming to reach out to our suppliers and say, hey, we need to know if you're USMCA compliant, or can you give us your HS codes, those kinds of things. Where do you kind of come out on that?
I give that job to my customs broker. They're the ones that are seeing the actual shipments coming into Canada, which ones have duty assessed against them, which ones that they feel require hands-on. So they will reach out to my supply base and request a renewed or certification as needed. And we vet those together. So we have some rules like do not accept origin criteria A. A is for Apple. We're in the electronics industry. We're not buying agriculture or forestry, fishing. So A is like your wholly produced product out of a country that is in Canada, US, or Mexico. So we will not use those types. And our job is not to educate our supplier on how to complete it correctly. If they do not have the in-house expertise, it is not up to my broker or myself to educate people. They need to take that responsibility themselves. We also have received certificates with origins such as Thailand, Philippines, and various. So, you really need to make sure they're signed, everything is correct. If they're not, you do not use it. If there's a question about it, do not accept. And if it's something not something superficial, we will work with the supplier, but if it's obviously apparent that they don't have an idea what the free trade agreement is, we're putting ourselves at risk, so we will not pursue that.
Yeah, that's a great, that's a wonderful answer, actually, because I have to tell you, the first thing that I do when we're going out and meeting with companies is show me your NAFTA certificates of origin that you're issuing and what you have received from others. And I cannot tell you, there has not been actually one occurrence in the last year and change of going through this process with companies where we have not found bad certificates of origin in the process, and they generally fall along the lines of what you've said. Is when you look at it, I'm in the auto business or the chemicals business, and you're telling me something's wholly produced in North America, which is usually an apple, a fish, or something that comes out of the ground, right? And I can see that the letter A is right there instead of a letter B criteria. And those are the types of things that will get your company in a jackpot. I'll just say very quickly to answer this question, U.S. Customs and CBSA have been adamant. NAFTA certificates of origin will not be accepted after June 30th. So you cannot submit a NAFTA certificate of origin. It needs to meet the criteria for USMCA. Now, the criteria is roughly the same, but don't rely on the old Form 434 as it was. But more importantly, you have, now's the time to go out and reach out to your suppliers and say, we need to know. Because that's the whole point of the form started to overtake the substance over time. The reality is what our customs authorities want you to do is actually know what's in your supply chain. And that record-keeping responsibility is on you. Elise, I want to turn it over to you for a second, because you have global operations, and we have USMCA, but you also, I know, have spent a lot of your life on TPP and CETA and everything else. Are you all thinking right now, I mean, obviously it's been a crazy time, but how these all stitch together? Maybe Marlene, a similar question for you. Those opportunities of looking at how do all these trade agreements, along with disruption in China and elsewhere, kind of all stitch together? And are there hidden gems and opportunities in that space? Or is it, hey, we're just going to, you know, we're plugging away with what we got right now, and we'll figure that all out later, you know? And because trust me, that's certainly a reaction too.
No, I think we have been focusing mainly on Ujczo or USMCA. Why? Because when you look at our supply chain, so I mean, even before, I mean, this period, our supply chain is mainly regional. So we manufacture in North America, or in America for America, and in Europe mainly for Europe, in Asia for Asia. So, but looking at what's happening now with our supply chain, so we might see some changes. So we have some sites now that are exporting globally. And with CPTPP, I think there is increasingly an interest of looking at Canada actually as a platform for exporting actually outside of the US, which is probably a change if you, in my opinion, as it was until now. I think it was mainly a Canada, US, Mexico platform, but now I think we're seeing more an interest of looking at all the other trade agreements and how Canada plays a role, or how even in the rest of North America is playing a role moving forward.
Anything from your perspective, Marlene, on the trade cloud, how this all stitches together? And from my, you know, that's the one thing I always caution our companies on is, you know, we all fall into our silos and stovepipes, right? So I'm working on USMCA today, but it's very likely something works for CUSMA that may not fit for TPP or Korea or CETA. In some cases, they may work perfectly. Or as Brenda knows, I may get something that's USMCA or CUSMA ready, but I'm still going to get hit with China 301 tariffs. So do you see opportunities for Canada in that space, given how aggressive Canada has been on the trade front, generally with agreements, and as Elise mentioned earlier, open for trade, frankly?
Yeah, and I think that the Canadian government has been very clear that they're open for trade, and that that USMCA obviously has taken the majority of 3 years and has been the fixation of the government. But I think as we move forward, I think some of the provisions that have been established within USMCA can be used as we enter into other trade agreements, which is always a good baseline that can be used. But yeah, I can't see the trade agenda. I think will continue. It will be interesting to see how the geopolitical over the last 3 to 4 months impacts trade as we move forward. I think that looking glass is somewhat difficult. If we all knew what was going to happen 6 or 12 months from now, it would be, we'd be able to plan a lot easier. But I think, if any indication, trade remains a very important piece. But I think this one, the USMCA is obviously the keystone to any Canadian international trade. It's really the thing that keeps us as a company and an economy, or sorry, as the economy going.
That's a masterful way to say that. I think it is the keystone for where we're going. Now, just as we round out here in the last few minutes, I'll just go around the horn, and starting with you, Brenda. Any final thoughts, particularly mindful that we have a lot of companies on the line right now and folks that advise companies as to, and I'm very confident some of them are saying, what am I going to do over the next 2 weeks? So any final kind of words of wisdom that you want to provide, and then I'll turn it to you, Elise, and then back to Marlene, and we'll wrap up with some wrap-up thoughts. But over to you, Brenda.
What I would like to say, do not go alone. Do it alone. If you need resources, reach out. As a company, you should have developed strong partnerships with your service providers who are on the front line, who are there to assist you. The more information you get, the better equipped you are to provide a good product. And by product, I mean a certificate of origin, which can be audited and are audited. So if you are not feeling confident with your harmonized code, or you don't understand the rule, you have to request help for those types of situations. There's consultants if you want to pay. If you have a great broker that has a department that specializes in that, that's willing to help you. I caution against guessing. If you're guessing, you're putting yourself and your company at risk, because there's some personal ownership as well. And as a logistics person, I do not want Ross to suffer for a mistake I made. It's my integrity. So hopefully people reach out, ask questions. If you don't understand the legislation, which it can be very difficult, ask for help.
That's a great comment. Don't be afraid to say lawyer either, Brenda. Don't be afraid to say that. Any final thoughts from you, Elise, and then Marlene?
So I was just actually thinking that, you know, I think that I'm kind of hoping that most companies have been planning for this. As I'm looking at the amount of work that has been put in to do some of the planning for USMCA CUSMA, and then I'm looking at what's happening with our economy right now, and how most of the organizations and companies are affected by COVID. And I mean, I'm looking at some of the think tank, some of the data that are coming out in terms of, you know, in revenue decreasing and what's happening with unemployment and all of that. So I'm really hoping that, you know, companies are able to combine dealing with their business, dealing with some of the incentive programs that the government have been putting in place actually to help them, and also dealing with the deadline of July 1st of USMCA. So I can't actually imagine how much work that must be if this has not, you know, if companies have not, or organizations have not started doing this quite a while ago. So I would echo Brenda's comment that if companies need help, I think it would be a really good time to reach out right now, as there's a lot to it. And as you said, Dan, if there's a lot of additional regulations or rules that came out last night, I guess we will all have to look into this and see how we will deal with all of that before July 1st, or whatever dates actually that was that came out of all the rules that came out last night. So.
And Marlene, any final thoughts there?
No, I think I'm going to leave it to my two panelists here. I think that Brenda provided some really good, you know, hands-on advice, and I think Elise hit some really good kind of big picture pieces. And you know, the North American market is a huge market, and there's a huge opportunity here. If you're a digital company, you now have protections that that can ensure that you can facilitate trade across those borders. And as we kind of pivot and try to innovate in the post-COVID world, I think we need to look to North America as with the US and with Mexico for great opportunities.
You know, and that's a great ending point as well, and right on time, which is unprecedented for me, by the way. But in terms of reaching out, as Jens said at the beginning, that there will be another session next week that Invest Ottawa and AmCham are holding on June 11th at 2 p.m. So that registration can be found on the chat feature, or Trevor and the gang will send that out to all of you. Additionally, we have since April 30th as AmCham and our firm Dickinson, Wright, and about 30 other organizations that don't know how to turn the lights on, obviously, but that we've been running a webinar series broken into 90-minute segments that get into some of the nitty-gritty. Those are all available on demand. You can go to dickinsonwright.com, and those are AmCham supported and sponsored. But all of us sit on the AmCham CUSMA committee. Feel free to reach out to AmCham or Invest Ottawa, and we'll get you taken care of with any questions. So truly, the lights turned off on me right at the final minute of this session. So that should be our cue. I want to thank Brenda, Elise, and Marlene for their work today. Just extraordinarily insightful comments. Invest Ottawa, AmCham, thank you for pulling everybody together. But our heartfelt appreciation goes to all of you that I can't believe how many of you stayed with us throughout the webinar. I'm usually the guy that signs on, logs on, and then walks away. So thank you for doing that. And with that, we will adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Thank you.